But I think that's a bit of a joke at the old days, but
some of the big plans that people are still, this way it takes a long time to fade away.
It does, doesn't it?
I mean, it's 500-600 years since the worst of the clan wars.
Yeah.
So it's quite a few generations.
Set him up
People
with
just
his
like it as a bragging right.
You set him up with his PowerPoint,
Few bars,
I think
Yeah,
so.
well, everything in the
The Civil War.
we don't come out.
And welcome to Conversations with Dr. Todd. Dr. Todd Zakrajsek.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Well, first of all, let's welcome him to the St. Augustine campus. He's seen a very small part of it so far, and I hope what you see you like. You are christening our university in. It's only of recent, generations is just coming in to place. I am hoping you enjoyed sleeping in the Vice Chancellor's room. That's what yours is, a Vice Chancellor's suite.
Very nice.
Okay.
Very nice.
Yes, they've gone all out. And I hope that the university in is going to be a stellar part of the institution. All right. Well, this year we have a very interesting topic, as we saw this morning from the interview. It can generate a lot of buzz, a lot of discourse. It's the joys and teaching, the joys and challenges of the greatest profession. And I saw Fazil put in what I wanted to put in the word at the end of the statement. Well, we know that there are lots of challenges in teaching, and we spoke about some this morning. But I like to focus on the positive first, and then we will come on to negative. So what I would do is to ask Todd to tell us a little bit about some of the joys of this greatest profession. And of course, I think we take questions as they come up, right? Because it's conversation, it's not a monologue, it's discourse. So people who have any human questions or any questions at all that you need to the profession, feel free to ask. I just want to say that as somebody who has been in the classroom for a large number of years, the impact of teaching is tremendous. And I'll give you all a story. I normally tell it to my lecturers. When I first started teaching, which was way back in the day, right? I was teaching as a teacher of biology. And I went to a school where everybody in the school hated the subject. And I couldn't understand how could you hate a subject like biology? It is about life, it is about you, it is vital, and if a subject like it could be described as vibrant, biology is it. My world revolved around biology. So I couldn't understand how a whole school could hate something like biology. And then when I went into the classes, the students, they would look at me very suspiciously. They probably wonder what mischief I was coming to do to them. And to do, that's to do. And when I started to speak with the Form 5s, because the Form 5s would come in and they would look at me, creature from somewhere else, and they would say, we like you, miss, but we don't like the subject. And I said, but how could you hate a subject? And then when I got to the bottom of it, it really had to do with their experiences with the biology teacher they had before. He used to come into the class and do what is called decimate. And I said, well, what do you mean by decimate? I don't even think I knew the word before. Decimate. So he would have this class, and he would come in and he would start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. So he would put every 10th person outside the class. Now, this was in the days, I told you, it's way, way back when things like corporal punishment existed. And if the principal caught you outside of the class, you will get strokes. The girls will get it in their hands and the boys somewhere, some other part of their anatomy. So the students really feared being outside. So they built up this tension whenever he was coming to the class, because they know that he was going to dismiss. They didn't know where he would start. So it could be anybody who would get out there, and then they have to run and hide all around the school, because if the principal would make rounds. So they were more concerned with what he was going to do to them than the subject matter. And they really built up this great fear of the subject, and it was translated into, they just didn't like the subject. And it really had to do with the impact of the teacher. So we as teachers could help our students to learn to love their subjects in there, or we can make our students hate. And they hate with that passion. It was so bad that first year they told me there's no way they can recover. Right? And that year only one person passed the GC at that time. Right? Before, of course, I had more time to work with them, and I had to spend a lot of time. This is where I really developed some teachers with, where I couldn't focus on content because they were not ready to deal with content. I had to talk with them and be human, because that person who was before me did not display any humane qualities. So I always like to tell that story about how one teacher could influence the perception of a subject for a whole school, as hundreds of students in dealing with. So that's my story. So I don't know if Todd has a story of similar ilk.
Well, actually, what I was going to ask, if you don't mind, I would like to ask is, so if I understand, this is a teacher that would do this, just randomly pick and count, and every 10 student would be kicked out of the classroom, even if they were a great student.
Even with, he didn't care, so I don't think he was doing much teaching.
Right. So here's what I love to look at is, I believe that everyone would prefer to teach well if they were given the choice. Even people who teach very, very poorly, if they were given the choice to teach well, they would prefer to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't also believe that anybody believes in their heart that the students are, that they can't be a good teacher. I think what they start to believe is the students don't want to learn, they lose faith. If a person loses faith, not just in teaching, in life, when a person loses faith, it's a sad, sad thing.
Yeah, yes.
So if they lose faith, or if they don't know what to do, or if they just go with their gut, this is what I think is right, then I think we run into a lot of problems, which is why we like evidence-based teaching. Let's look at what does work, let's read about teaching, but our teachers are rarely taught how to teach well.
Yeah.
So whenever I hear of a situation like this, I always try in my head to think, okay, so why would a person do that? And my guess is that he had a reason.
Yes, it was maintaining discipline. His concept of discipline.
Yes.
Well, because he wanted to, yes, he wanted the student to sit down, shut up, and listen to him.
Yes.
Right? So it's a way of intimidating, and that's the power thing. He intimidated them by having this thing. They don't know what I'm going to throw at them. Who will be outside this morning? And everybody is quiet and hoping it's not me.
That's right, and so I suspect that's exactly what he did. And it demonstrates his power.
Yes.
Is that I can count along, and even if you are the best student in the room, you now go.
Yes.
And that demonstrates how much power I have. And when a person believes that that's what they need, it's really sad.
Right.
But I can understand. So, well, or he should have been taught. You know, if we could teach our teachers how to teach, if somebody could have said to him, you don't need to do that to demonstrate power. There are other things you can do.
Yeah.
But so I do have one quick story for this whole concept is I went to a classroom one time of a faculty member who said, my students won't participate. I call on them, I want them to do things, they just sit there, they won't do anything. He says, terribly frustrating. So I said, well, if you would like, I will come to your class. And I went to his class. He taught engineering. He asked a student a question. As the student started to respond, he walked to the corner and turned his back on the class and stood in the corner. When the student finished speaking, he turned around and he said, would anyone like to add to that? And one student started to say, well, here's one thing I would add. And as that student spoke, he turned back to the wall again. So after class, I said, how did you think class went today? And he says, didn't you notice? The students are very resistant to participate. And I said, well, yeah, I did notice that, and I always try to be very positive. And so I said, I'm just curious, why is it that you go to the corner and turn your face into the corner? I didn't say you shouldn't do that. I just said, why? And he says, well, I want the students to respond, but I don't want to bias their responses. If you are saying something and I'm nodding, then that means I agree with what you're saying. If I stop nodding, it means you've gone in a wrong direction. If I say something confusing and the teacher goes like this, he said, that's too much information. I want to hear what they have to say.
Oh.
So he had a very good reason for this. He just was stupid and how he did it. So I said, I'll tell you what I would suggest. Based on evidence that I have seen, human beings will talk more and share more when you maintain eye contact and give some response, but somehow you're acknowledging them. Said, if you really don't want to do that, one of the things you could do is tell your students, I am going to turn away from you and listen very carefully to what you say, but I don't want to bias your response with my facial features. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But if I turn, that's what I'm doing. When I turn back around, I will repeat what I heard, and then I will ask if there's anything else. So at that point he would say, what I'm hearing you say is that the strength of the iron is like this, and that's very important in bridge making, but there's something you didn't address. Anybody else? Then if you turn around like this and somebody addresses, you turn back around and say, that was a good response. He called me 2 weeks later and he said, the class is so much fun. He said, everyone's responding, we're talking, and sometimes I turn, sometimes I don't. Sometimes the students turn away. He said, the students sometimes will start talking and say, what I'm thinking. But the reason I mention this is that was an individual who was getting very frustrated. His students were getting frustrated. And my guess is if he had been left alone, his behaviors would have got worse and worse and worse as he tried to do other things, and then as he punished his students for not responding. If you all are not responding, maybe it's because you didn't read, let's have a quiz. So you get into these really illogical ways of doing things. But I think that's a big one, is looking for things that seem odd and figuring out, why did a person do that?
How were you in a position to do that? How were you in a position to do that?
I was the faculty development director.
It's like me.
And so I sent a note out to the campus and said, if you would like me to come, I will sit in your class, and I will watch the class, and we have a couple of options.
So you can ask.
Yeah, it's a neat thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do. And as the faculty development director, we sit in the corner, we're very quiet, we take some notes, we meet with you afterwards, maybe the next day. I will usually send a quick summary. Here's what I noticed in class. Which of these things would you like to talk about? So I might say, I love how you got the attention of the group. You are really good at taking a bunch of individuals and getting them to focus. I really liked how you laid the material out. That was fabulous. I'm a bit concerned in the way that you responded to some of the students, that they may think that you're being harsh. You might want that, that's okay. If you'd like to talk about it, we can. It wasn't bad, it's just that I was a little concerned about that. But overall, I think you did a very good job. And then you send me a note that says, yes, let's talk more because I don't mean to be harsh.
There's a point that I mean, one of the things I try to encourage lecturers to is to talk to their students. They have to not talk at.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that I think a lot of people take for granted is that the students understand your methodology and what you're doing and why. And I think as part of practice, lecturers do not spend any time explaining to the student, this is what I'm going to be doing. So that's what he was caught in. He was caught into using a strategy that he did not explain to the students. So the students had no idea as to what he was doing. So they had their own interpretation that he didn't care about us
quick.
when in truth and in fact he was using a technique. And I think one of the important, because we tend to be a very content-leading institution, one of the things I always recommend is that you explain to the students what it is, what methodology, what method you're going to be using. If it's group work, how you're going to organize it, why you're using group work here. Because we don't feel that the students need to know what our technique and methods are. We feel that is for me to know and for the students to discover somehow, because their focus should only be on learning. And these are some of the issues we have to deal with, in terms of best practice.
Or we just assume that the students must know this. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm
You
giving
must understand what I'm doing.
if I start the class with a quiz, you must understand that you have to do the reading ahead of time. You must understand that you must bring paper and a pencil, and that's pretty obvious. And so I might just say, I assume that you're going to figure that out, or that you know it. But the fact is, and I've gone over a lot of places, and I've been teaching almost 30 years. We are very different, but the students in psychology, that's my background, students see groups of faculty as being very similar. Oh, you are all faculty. Faculty make the same mistake and will say, oh, the students. The students are very different. Some students are very conscientious, do all of their work. They're fabulous. Other students don't want to be there. Some students are very interested in helping the instructor to do a good job. Some students are not interested in it. I mean, they're very different. But faculty, we do things very differently. And so if the students have to figure it out and they mess up a little bit, then we get really critical, like, how dare you do that in my classroom? But I have heard some instructors say, students are not to ask questions during class.
Yeah.
I will teach my lesson, and then at the end of the lesson, students may ask questions. Other faculty will say, I want the students to ask questions all during class. Some faculty will say, don't you ever challenge me, I am the teacher. If you don't like that, you leave. Other faculty will say, I'm just the person who's facilitating the learning. I want you to challenge me. Challenge me, make me think. Now, if I tell you, challenge me, make me think, then you go into somebody else's class and the student says, are you sure you want to use that formula there? The teacher turns around and says, you get out of my classroom. And so I think explaining to the students, I love what you said, saying, here is what I'm doing and why. There are very, very few times when that's bad. If I tell you, I'm going to have a quiz at the beginning of every class, that is because I like to have discussions that are really deep discussions. That does not happen if you haven't done the reading. I want to make sure you've done the reading. I'm going to quiz you every class. I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm doing it so that you can have good conversations. I'm going to hand you back every quiz that you take. You will get the responses back the next day. That way you can see how it's going. If you don't get the response back the next day, you can all say, Dr. Z, where are our quizzes you promised us? And I won't quiz you on that day. So if you don't get the quiz back, you don't have to take one that day. I'm also going to ask you all as students to watch what I do. And if I make a mistake, I want you to raise your hand very quickly anytime you hear a mistake. In fact, I will give 1 point of extra credit to the first person that raises his or her hand and says, excuse me, Dr. Z, I believe you made a mistake in that formula. And then if I say, ooh, good point, I'm teaching my students to question. Now, as I go through that, I explain to you, I'm teaching you to question, that's why I want you to raise your hand. And then at the end, I will say, on the first day of class, this all happens. But now be careful, this is my class. My colleagues down the hall will have very different expectations. Don't assume we're the same. But the students really do well in my class, and I think a big chunk of it is they know what to expect, and they know the game for that class.
Right.
By the way, the one thing I do like, I will mention, giving the little tiny bit of extra credit for the first time they catch you making an error is really smart, because number one, you can, if you're making a mistake someplace, you get it caught right away, so the mistake doesn't get compounded. Actually, 3 reasons. Number 2, it keeps them awake.
Yes.
Because as they're watching, I teach statistics, which unlike biology is fascinating. So when I'm teaching statistics, I need the students paying attention, and so if they're watching, ooh, is he going to make a mistake? Then that keeps them attentive. Sometimes I make a mistake, And if the students, or I'll make a mistake on purpose,
Yeah.
just, I'll be going along and I'll say, in this part of the formula, that's 300 plus 400 is 900, and divided by, and someone will say, no, 300 plus 400 is 700, not 900. I'll say, oops, I made a mistake, sorry me. And then I give them a point, and that keeps them awake. But if I really make a mistake and it's embarrassing, all I have to do when I make the mistake and they raise their hand, I say, oh, good catch. And they don't know if I did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Text me.
Yeah.
But if I do it right, the extra points that they get really don't change the grades at all. There's like 500 points. I do point systems for so many tests, so many homework assignments. If there's 500 points, you get like a half a point by catching a mistake. You can get up to 5 points in the class. You catch me, you're the first one to catch me 10 times. And if I turn around and there are 3 hands in the air, I just don't call on the one who almost always does it, so I can spread it around. 5 points out of 500
Yes.
does not change their grade, but it keeps it moving. But the point of all of this is telling them, this is what I am doing and this is why I'm doing it. I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, but I'm using that point system not only for things like that. In fact, I've never thought of mistakes. I'm going to add that to my portfolio, right? But I use it a lot for a whole series of things in the classroom. If you come early, if you participate in the discussion, if you put something on the blog that I have that helps the whole class. And I don't do more than 5. I didn't realize I was a
Yep.
sort of saluting point, 5,
Yep.
because I was wondering if I should go more, but I think 5 for what you're saying. So but I really find I'm getting a lot of interest
Yeah,
because
good.
of that, and I like it a lot. The other thing I wanted to add was the content issue, right? What is happening to me though is that I find that I'm getting so much involved in methodology of teaching to make sure that my students know how to learn what I'm teaching, right?
Oh, good.
That
Yeah.
I'm moving away into less and less content, and it worries me. But where I sort of catch myself is at the end of the term, when the students have to, I definitely involve presentations and reflections of their field work, which I do a lot in English, right? And I'm amazed at how much learning is taking place. And the amount of content that I didn't actually specify, but because of how they interpreted what they have to learn about the subject, I'm seeing all kinds of things. There's a group, one of my groups this year, and it's still on my mind. They ended up finding a pig farm that was horrible. I mean, the guy has some of the most unhygienic practices. He lives in a community, and everybody in the community doesn't like him because he's really stenching the place up. They even found out that one of the community members was saying his children look like pigs. It was, it was that bad. And the thing, what struck me about all that is my other colleagues will teach about pig farming, and they will teach about excellent pig farming where everything is pristine, there's toilet floors, there's good housing, there's almost air conditioning for the pigs. And here's this guy they would never have encountered if I didn't sort of encourage them to look at the whole outreach picture. So I'm not too worried, but I'm still scared and I'm moving more and more away from full content, and I don't know where it will end. I could very well end up, I worry I could very well end up with just one subject for the whole term. But around which everything might evolve. Right?
And we have this fear, that there's this inherent fear that if we don't say, it's not done. But we are not the ones who have to cover the content.
That's the point.
Students, and we have to have the confidence that the students will be able to go out there and engage the content. It's about showing them how to do that.
So one of
in
my
the right direction.
Yes,
right
yes,
direction.
yes.
You're absolutely right. One of my favorite quotes is that a teacher's job is not to cover content; it's to uncover it.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
That's a good
And
point.
I think that's what you're doing. So
Yeah.
the only thing I would add to that is number one, a good understanding of what it is that the students should know, be able to do, and everything else at the end of the class. So if you say, my students, I'm just going to pick this off the top of my head, in a psychology class, my students should have a basic understanding of the terminology. So if given 50 terms in introductory psychology that relate to psychological principles, they should know those. My students should also understand the major systems of psychology. So if given 3 or 4 different systems, they should be able to explain it. And my students should be able to think critically about new information. If I give you something brand new, you should be able to interpret it and understand it and talk about it a little bit. Now, if those are my goals, and I have that very cleanly stated over here, now I can teach any way I want to teach. And what I do at the end is I measure them with these goals. And if they're doing this, then I'm doing my job.
That's it, yeah.
The danger is that there is a move that happened about 10 years, pretty much worldwide, moving away from teacher-centered, it hasn't gone away yet, but teacher-centered versus learning-centered for instruction. A teacher-centered classroom where I walk in and I say, okay, everybody, sit down, be quiet, and you will learn from me. That's right. You will learn from me. At the end, we have the exam. If you get bad scores on the exam, you didn't try very hard. The students didn't try. Now there's this more learning-centered, where I come in the room and I have to figure out how am I going to get everybody to learn this stuff. And if the students don't, this is the danger, if the students don't learn it, it's not all the students' fault. Part of it is. But part of it's my fault because I didn't help them to get it. Your methods are scary to the teaching-centered folks. Because what they're sitting back and thinking is if you don't, it's exactly what you said, if you don't cover the material and explain it, and they don't get it, then you're going off on this weird teaching tangent. You shouldn't do that. You should be more conventional because my students get it. What these people don't understand is very shortly after the class, that strict teaching method breaks down very, very quickly. Your students will remember not only the content, but they'll also remember the process of learning for years to come.
Yeah, and where I'm realizing that it works is invariably I can actually take material from this year's class and use it in my next year's class to show my new students what I expect of them in the end, what kind of understanding. And so, I mean,
That's good.
I've been doing that for the last 5 years for very, very good reasons.
That sounds great.
Like them to-
Well, the one I always like to point out too is if a person believes, and I loved your statement, many people believe if I don't teach it, if I don't say it, it can't be learned. I have to cover it. And they'll have these, they'll say, I'm running out of time, I must cover all these things. I'll say that is a very good way to teach if you are going to follow each student for the rest of their life. Because when we go into the new environment, I could say, oh, I need to teach you about this. And then you go to the next environment, oh, I need to teach you about this. My job is I have a short period of time to teach you how to think about things and to really understand them. So what I'm supposed to do is figure out how do I help you so that a year later when I'm not around, you can learn on your own. So I have spent my entire life, whatever I'm doing, trying to work my way out of a job. And keeping in mind what needs to be done. If good teachers were no longer needed because students all have figured out a system for learning on their own, we would do something else, which would be great. We would do something fabulous. But if a
And
person,
make more money.
and there's more, you always can, people come back to the money part. But until that's true, we need really good teachers to do this. But the teacher who says, you need me, you can't learn without me, that person's not trying to work their way out of a job. That person's trying to protect their job. And in every field, if I dug ditches, and I could figure out a way for the ditches to be dug without me digging them, I would go do something else. If I was an engineer and could figure out ways for buildings to be designed without me involved because they just happened by some great system, then I would do something else. But I think that changes the tone when you think, how can I teach so well that the students don't really need me? And I think you're getting close to that.
So do you think
One reason, sorry.
do you think there's a problem when it comes to learning centered with PowerPoint? Because to me, PowerPoint seems like a tool for passing content.
Yeah.
You'll put a whole bunch of bullet points, statements on the board, and then they put it on the virtual learning environment as well, but it's all here's content.
Yes.
And we end up with lecturers reading to their students, reading their own notes to the students.
So, you could put a lot, first of all, and I love this stuff too, is the problem's not the PowerPoint. I mean, there's the old thing with handguns, they say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, the guns help, but the person still has to be holding it. And so the concept with the PowerPoint is, PowerPoint can be used to do really wonderful things, but my thought on that one is, if you go back to where PowerPoint came from, PowerPoint was not developed for teachers by teachers. Does anybody know, or do you know where PowerPoint came from? Marketing. And why would you use PowerPoint in marketing?
You want to sell stuff.
To whom? You've got a very short period of time,
Yeah.
and you're trying to sell a group of individuals who are fairly disinterested. And when you walk through the door, you're going to do about a 3-minute presentation that's going to get a board to say, wow, okay, that I'm buying. It's marketing. So now, if we walk into the classroom and we put together a PowerPoint presentation that said, at the end of this presentation, when it comes to, so I teach the most inherently interesting topics in the whole college curriculum. I teach statistics. I teach the history of psychology.
Wow.
That was cool. And how humans learn.
Oh, that's.
Seems like that's the good, right? That's the most boring class of the 3. Yeah, because I just think, because and coming back to this thing, because it's my primary area, I come back to these slides and I think there is so much content. You have to know all of these things. Now I come to the history of psychology. I get into the history of psychology and I'll do things like, and back to the PowerPoint. If at the end of today, what I really want you to understand is where Sigmund Freud got his information. You've heard of Freudian psychology, right? So if I put together a PowerPoint presentation that's all bullet points, you sleep through it. Instead, I show slides of Vienna. I can show slides of his office. I show slides of a woman that was claimed to be a neurotic woman as one of his patients. And then I do circles of how information from this discipline would tie to another discipline, and get into small groups, and what do you think goes in this circle over here? I'm still using PowerPoint, but what I'm using it for is to help me stay on task, but for you to see what's going on. I could just as easily reel off a bunch of things.
Yes.
When teachers realized how powerful PowerPoint was, and that you could take the stuff you used to write on the board and type it into the slides and then just project it, and it saves you all that writing time. And so what happened was PowerPoint turned evil because people just took all their handwritten notes, typed them in, and said, and here's the next thing and what their statements we could say, here's the next thing I would have written on the board, here's the next thing, here's the next thing, here's the next thing. And the students are saying, here's how it goes, slow down, I can't write that, slow down. You say, but I have to get through the content. And they say, well, tell you what, could you just give me the slides later? And the teacher said, sure. Now there's no reason to pay attention at all. So I sleep through class, I get the slides, I don't read them, and then I flunk the test.
So we need a pedagogy of PowerPoint.
You go to your center.
No, it's about powerful points. It's not about powerful content.
Yes,
It's
yes.
about- And if you just have 1 or 2 points on your PowerPoint, that's enough.
Yes.
With
That's
other
what-
things
yes.
to support, and we are tempted in our system here, I find, because you'll just say, well, okay, you want the slides, I'll put it up at my living room. And that's the worst thing, the student really would come to it. But I wanted to just go on another tangent. We are having I am still having a lot of absentees in the class.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've resolved it the way I teach otherwise, so I'm not so sure that I lose a lot out of it, but I really worry about it. I can't, after about the third, fourth week, I can't get more than 70% in my class.
That's really good.
Well, I might be doing good, but I would like to get up. I like to get everybody to be there, which is probably absolutely too much. But what is your take on absenteeism and attendance and all that?
So I have and so I'll put this out there already, is I have a strange way of looking at lots of stuff. So you take what you like and ignore the rest. No, but I am a cognitive behavioral psychologist, so I look at these types of things very seriously. Number one is I try to figure out who really should be in the room. Because out of 100% of the people who have signed up for the class, it may be that not all of them belong there. So if those individuals, and I'll get to why that is, but I don't mean the person who is not kind of motivated, you could draw them in. I mean the just outright student who should not be in there. If they're absent, actually I think that's a good thing. So if I hit 90% attendance, I'm okay with that, because there's probably 10%. The person who sits in the back of the room who just, I draw people in, I do group work, I do all this stuff, I'll still have someone in the back of the room who will say,
Yeah.
so, how are you doing? What's going on? Did you see this puzzle? Look at this. I have a YouTube clip. Look at this YouTube clip. I want that person out of the room. That's a good absence.
Okay, good.
Now, once we get rid of those people, let's say a couple of percent is all. The next point we have are the individuals who are happy to leave the room. They get distracted very easily, but if we could just draw them in, they would be fine. Those are the people who won't come if I stand there and lecture for the entire time. They find that too boring, they just won't come. So getting the students working on projects like you're doing, I find helps a lot. There are other things that we can do, of course. We can have quizzes. I like to quiz at the beginning of the class. The students have to show up for the quiz, and then they take the quiz. I have some students who showed up, took the quiz, and then they would leave. And okay, that made me frustrated. So then what I started to do was ask 3 multiple choice questions and 1 short answer. The 3 multiple choice were the things that you're going to cover today, and the short answer is something that happened in the last class. So answer this question on classical conditioning, what's a conditioned stimulus, what's an unconditioned stimulus, and what's a discrimination index. Anna Mae, last class period, brought up a really good point with her cat and how her friend is afraid of her cat. Explain what we decided about that. That took care of the people who took the quiz, got up and left. Because now they take the quiz and then they have to see what happens in the class, because that's a part of the quiz the next time.
Okay.
So that made my attendance go up. So there's ways we can do this. But by and large, because I am a behavioral psychologist, if the student doesn't see any value in sitting in class, they tend to leave.
Yeah, that's okay.
And so I talk to my students, and at times I will say, what is it? I ask lots of questions. 3 class periods into a semester. What is it about this class that you are finding informative and helpful? What about this class could I do to make it even better? I don't ask what's good or what's bad. What is going well? What would make it even better? Sometimes the students will write, well, it would be better if you quit. So they can be mean. They might say, well, it would be better if you stop picking on people. So there's certain statements like that. But instead of me saying, what's the problem with class, where they think, oh, what is a problem? I don't want to make them think of problems. And when they write it down, what I like about the class is that you treat us all with respect. What I don't like about the class is sometimes you tell us the reading is really important, but you don't talk about it. Then I can come back and I say, okay, then I'm going to change that. But I've built up attendance. My attendance usually hangs around 95%, 90 to 95. I've taught classes as big as 600. My classes with 600 usually had about 85, maybe 90%. But a lot of it was getting the students to working together, and in my head I have to think, if I'm going to drive to campus, park my car, show up, maybe walk through a rainstorm, sit down in the class, and at the end of an hour get up and leave, go back to my car, maybe get caught in the rain again, and drive home, what would make that hour worth coming for? And if I think what would make that valuable, now I'm thinking about how to do it, that's way different than I need to cover chapter 4. And if all I'm thinking is covering chapter 4, that doesn't help the attendance.
Right.
So,
Because one of the things I always maintain, because we tend to be big on attendance, but I think it is wrong to really expect students to come and sit down with somebody who's going to bore them to death.
yeah.
And a lot of lecturers, they take no pride in any kind of motivation. They want students to come in and sit down and listen to them for 50 minutes, explanation on things that the students not really understanding. And I don't think that's fair. They make the class boring. There's no life in the class. And I think we have to move beyond that.
Well, and I do think that's changing all the time now, because I kind of smile. You could go back a couple of thousand years. If we go back a couple of thousand years, the only way that you could learn from me is if I talked to you. There were no books. There's nothing to write down. We would learn. I mean, this is what Aristotle, Plato, those folks did, is we would talk, and that's how we learn. And then books come out. And there's actually quotes out there, with books being widely available, college professors will no longer be necessary, because you could just read the book. But that's not true. People read the books, they don't get it, they don't get motivated, they have to be told what the tough things are. So faculty members started lecturing more. I mean, they did talk and lectured a lot, but they kept lecturing. And the students had the book, but they kept talking like before there were books.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, you read the book, let's talk about what's in the book. The faculty said, okay, let me tell you what's in the book. And then videos come out, and websites come out, and all instant communication, so social networking comes out, and all of that stuff is out there, and yet people walk into the classroom as if it were 1,000 years ago and say, the only way for you to learn is if I talk to you. There was just recently an article that I loved about Pinterest. I don't know if any of you have ever, did any of you know what Pinterest is? Yes. It's, my daughter says Facebook is old. The younger kids now, Facebook is old for old people. Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram. There was an individual who said he was curious about, and I think it was Pinterest, but it may have been Instagram or Tumblr even, but he said as he was heading to his office, he liked to work the New York Times crossword puzzle. And it was Pinterest, because what he did is he would shoot a picture of the puzzle, a piece of it, and he would type in the clue next to it. He says, anybody know what this is? 20 minutes, he had the New York Times puzzle completely done, in 20 minutes. Normally took him all day of going back and forth. My very first thought was, if he could do the New York Times by asking everybody, here's a piece of information, does anybody know what this is? And then they type in, yeah, it's this. And everybody in the system saw it and said, oh, good one. It wasn't just him that would do the puzzle. The entire group would have done the puzzle in 20 minutes. Hold that in your head, and then think about a college professor that says, let me tell you about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is when an unconditioned stimulus, and all of a sudden it starts to think, wait a minute, why don't you put some stuff up there and have the whole group say, does anybody know what this is? Does anybody know what this is? Could somebody tell us this? And then what I could do is simply say, wow, really good, and then I could ask the questions. I think in the very near future, the good teachers, all they will do are ask questions and not answer anything. They will just ask good questions and nod. Good. And probably don't need to nod, because if I ask a good question of 50 people, and all 50 are typing in kind of a response and saying, yeah, that's good, and what about this, and what about this, they already know it's right, because there are a whole bunch of people coalescing on this point. So the lecturing and the boredom in the classroom, I think part of it is we have a new society, and yet people are trying to teach like 1,000 years ago. So yeah.
That's maybe a power thing, because the model you're describing is a kind of equal status model,
Yes.
where the students and lecturers can share an idea. The lecturer is brave enough to say, what is this? And stand back and don't give the answer. But there are many people who feel that they are here, the students are here, and they're wouldn't be able to engage with the model that you're suggesting, just because they feel they need to be powerful and in charge.
So before I leave, I gotta make sure to get your name too, because you just gave me the idea for the next article. Somebody asked me to write this article, and I didn't know what the topic was gonna be, and you just made me think of what it is. Good teaching is changing from telling students the answers to asking the right questions. If we could get people to say, if you're a really good teacher, you know what questions to ask. If you're not a good teacher, you wouldn't know which ones to ask. So I don't care what knowledge you can give me. I would respect you and see you as a good teacher if you ask me the right questions. that's not the model right now, and the students will even say, sure, he asks a lot of questions, but I don't know what he knows. We need to change the system where the students can start to say, wow, he asked some really good questions today. And then we can see you as the expert, but you can still let us do the learning.
Yeah, and then still be room for lectures to show what they know, because then they can put all their publications and research, and they can put that out there and say, look, I do know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
You know, I'm not.
yeah. Are they testing the fire alarm?
I think they're telling us this is the end of our session.
Oh, the class, this would be the time change?
No, it's a mosquito.
I don't
No,
know.
that could be an alarm test.
Is that true? I think.
Well, if we see smoke, I'm gonna move, but unless there's smoke.
I have to go to class.
Oh, yeah, it is 4 o'clock.
Right, yeah.
So,
Sorry about
But I think, just to wrap up though, I think you're absolutely right. I think not only putting the information out there, but if we change the model to good teachers ask good questions and set up good points, we don't have to worry about demonstrating the real expertise, because you're still the one that says, yesterday, based on you guys doing this, today we need to go in this direction. I still know what you're talking about. I know that you know it. But we gotta change the model. That's good. I'm gonna write the article about changing that model.
Is this